The New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to the New Norm. So every year when I read the scriptures, I start at the beginning of the Bible, the middle of the Bible, and then somewhere in the New Testament. And then I kind of try to read through it sequentially. And I try to do that so that I have variety, that I'm reading different parts of the text. And if I ever get, bored or I feel like I'm in a rut in one particular passage, I have a couple others to balance them out and keep things interesting. And every once in a while, all three of my readings will kind of sync up on a particular theme. And this happened to me the other week. And I think the theme was around patience and timing. So here was my reading from the book of Judges. And if you're all familiar with the book of Judges, there's some really famous kind of Bible heroes, kind of Sunday school flannel graph type icons like Samson and Deborah and Gideon. And then there's some people that you just really haven't heard of at all. People that you'd skip right over if you weren't looking for them. This is what I read in Judges chapter 12. These is verses 8 through 15. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem led Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters, and he gave his daughters away in marriage to those outside his clan. And for his sons, he brought in 30 young women as wives from outside his clan. Ibzan led Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite led Israel 10 years. Then Elon died and was buried in Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. And after him, Abdon, son of Hillel from Pirathon, led Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He led Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, son of Hillel, died and was buried at Pirathon in Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. So we learned very little about these judges. All we know is that Ibzan led Israel for 7 years, and then he died. And Elon led Israel for 10 years, and then he died. And Abdon led Israel for 8 years, and then he died. It's very, very little of note for their particular stories. So after that, my reading was in Ecclesiastes, and this is a passage that you might be familiar with. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It says this: "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die." So even when we look back at that Judges passage, there was a time for them to be born, there was a time for them to lead, and then there was a time for their journey on this earth to end. They didn't know when that was. They didn't get to choose it. It just happened. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. That was a verse that has always kind of struck me as curious. And I was doing some research and realized that in ancient times, when you captured another city or if you invaded another people and you wanted to hinder their ability to grow crops, you would scatter large stones all over their fields so that they couldn't farm them. Or maybe if you took over a territory or somebody had invaded you and they put stones all over your fields and made them unplowable, you'd have to gather them up. So some people think that's what they're referring to there. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. And when I read this message, the thought came to me that many times that I have struggled in my spiritual journey, it's usually been because I'm not exactly sure what time it is. I haven't taken a moment to pause or reflect and discern and say, okay, God, what season do you have me in right now? And if you're at all like me, maybe you've gotten frustrated because you were supposed to be in a time of mourning and you kept trying to skip through it to a time of dancing. Or maybe you were supposed to be in a time of searching, but you were tired and you wanted to be in a time of giving up. I was on a road trip the other weekend. I was dropping my daughter Grace back off at her college in Detroit, and we passed a funeral home box truck. And on the side of this truck was the funeral home's logo or their slogan, and it said this. It said, "Moving families from grieving to times of remembrance." And I remember thinking, I know what they're trying to say, but it's not helpful, because if you've ever lost somebody, you know that you can't push through grieving. You can't be moved from grieving to another season. And in our Western culture, especially in a place like West Michigan, where many of us have Northern European roots, there's a lot of discomfort around our feelings or expressing our feelings. And because we're uncomfortable with certain feelings, especially feelings like regret or loss or grief, we want to skate over those. We want to move past them. We want to jump over them. And sometimes we miss the invitation from God that says, this is the season that I have you in. Be here now. That line says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. And he has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to the end. And there are times in our life, there are seasons that are legitimately confusing. We have no idea what God is doing. We don't know how God is going to fix it or resolve it or turn it. And it's not our job to know those things. But when we're waiting in that in-between time, we can hold on to this hope that God does, in fact, make everything beautiful in the broader arc of his work and his mission and his love. So Judges and the seasons of those judges, those obscure judges' leadership was kind of my first reading. Ecclesiastes was my second reading, and then my final reading was in the book of James. And there's another invitation here to patience, to waiting, to hopeful expectation. The writer of James says this in James chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. I'm not a patient person. We've talked about this earlier on this episode. I hate waiting around. I want to believe in a microwave God that gives me results for all of my prayers and crises between 30 and 90 seconds. When in reality, we serve like a master pit boss of Southern barbecue, where God is like, I've got a brisket and it's going to take 36 hours for this to be done, but it'll be worth it on the other side. James says, I want you to think like a farmer and realize that there's this pause, there's this break between planting and rains and weeping. So he says, be patient, stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. And then he gives another illustration. He says, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering or discomfort, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and see what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. And if you're familiar at all with the story of Job, you know that he was a person who was incredibly successful, lost all of his material wealth, lost all of his children, and then there was this season of just horrific pain and mourning and weeping. But then later, the things that Job lost on the material level were returned to him. And while he didn't get the children that he lost back, his family expanded again. And I love that line that says this. It says, the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. And when we think about Job's perseverance, we also have to remind ourselves that in time, God finally brought about something good for Job. And if you're in a season of trial or testing, or you're in a season of discomfort right now, I want to remind you that the Lord is, in the end, the Lord is going to bring about something that is good. Good for his cause, good for his name, good for your character, good for his mission. And the challenge is us just holding this moment with open hands, allowing God to bring out of it what he wants to. And then there's one more illustration in James about patience. It says this in verse 17, Elijah was a human being, even as we are. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. It's like Elijah was aware that there was a time for praying for drought, and there was a time for praying for rain. And I don't know what time God has you in right now, but if you're at all like me, you might be tempted to want to fast forward through this season to get to the next one. But I want to encourage you to resist that temptation, because there are gifts that God wants to give in this season that we cannot receive any other way. And God is doing a work underneath the surface. God is doing a work over the horizon. God is doing a work behind the curtain that, again, is good for us. It's good for his people. It's good for God's mission in the world, and it's good for God's glory. And if we would have just the patience to wait a second or a minute or a month or a year or a season longer than our flesh wants us to, my guess is we're going to see something beautiful in its time. That if we wait with hope and courage and faith and gentleness, one day, like Job, we'll be able to see what the Lord is finally going to bring about. And like Elijah, if we're faithful in seasons of drought, then God can trust us to be faithful in seasons of plenty. There is a time for everything. And maybe this week, the best question that you can ask God in your times of prayer or journaling or reflection or listening is, God, will you reveal to me what time this is? The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, families, and businesses stronger through counseling and coaching. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.